views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Open BXRx, BronxNet's special coverage providing you the latest information that matters to you during COVID-19, the coronavirus. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Tuesday, April 28th. Coming up, we'll discuss prisoners during COVID-19 with the Executive Director of NYU Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law, and why many are urging Governor Cuomo to free prisoners during the pandemic. Then, we'll discuss the rising MTA employee deaths due to COVID-19, how the Transit Authority has been dealing with the impact, and more with an MTA Chief Operating Officer. After that, the Education Trust NY informs us on their recent findings regarding lack of education equity through COVID-19 in underserved communities. And stick around for some holistic remedies and immune system boosting ingredients with Comelonas, a Bronx foodie duo. So please stay tuned. Open BXRx starts now. Welcome to Open BXRx on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, inviting you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Also, if you're currently watching us on cable, you can continue to stay up to date with our on-screen social media feeds, providing you the latest COVID-19 community updates and important headlines. Conditions in jails and prisons have always been a cause for concern, but especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic. Mayor Bill de Blasio's office recently announced that more than 1,500 inmates have been released from city jails. However, many advocates have been calling for Governor Andrew Cuomo to hashtag let them go and hashtag free them all to stop the spread. Joining us now to discuss prisons during COVID-19 and more is Vincent M. Southerland, Executive Director of the NYU Law's Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law. Thank you for joining us, Vincent.
Thanks for having me.
So first, I want to start off with learning about your work at NYU Center for Race, Inequality, and the Law.
Sure. So we're an interdisciplinary institute that's housed at the law school and committed to confronting the laws, policies, and practices that drive racial inequality and lead to the oppression and marginalization of people of color. We engage in public education, policy advocacy, litigation, with an eye toward raising our collective consciousness about race and inequality in America, to try and restore some fairness to our criminal legal system and combat the crisis of mass incarceration and to secure equity in community development and the provision of government services. We also look at the role of technology and trying to advance racial justice with the use of technology that so often informs decision-making in the systems that govern our lives. We partner with advocates, academics, and communities to advance racial justice, really.
Thank you, Vincent. And about the current COVID-19 outbreak in jails like Rikers, for instance, why are many advocating now to free prisoners and using the hashtags let them go and free them all for this cause?
Sure. So the reality is that in the absence of a global pandemic, prisons, jails, immigration detention centers are ordinarily hotbeds of disease, infection, and death. And COVID-19 really compounds those dangers by magnitudes, both for the people who are locked behind their walls and for those who work in those facilities as well. And so becoming infected with a potentially lethal disease, by any reasonable standard is well beyond the cost that one should pay when they're incarcerated. No one's been sentenced to death by COVID-19, and yet that's what we fear is going to happen to so many who are behind prison walls.
Can we talk about just the structure of a prison and the emphasis on the improbability of social distancing while in a jail or prison?
Sure. So the reality is that these places, prisons and jails, are designed really to keep people in close quarters, in close contact. Healthcare in those facilities is often overwhelmed and inadequate. People are being denied hand sanitizer for fear that it'll be turned into contraband. Even the guards who are in these facilities they're working and they're saying that they're working kind of cesspools of illness. And it's true of prisons and jails nationwide. The practices that are really required to limit the spread of coronavirus between healthy people um, physical distancing, using hand sanitizer, washing your hands, all those things are impossible in carceral settings. And so what we've really seen is that the only way to try and to limit the spread of this disease and to try to limit the death and illness and sickness that's going to come from it is to release as many people as possible. We've heard stories talking about their lives in prison. One gentleman named John Lennon, who's incarcerated at Sing Sing here in New York State, noted he's 60 years old. He's been in prison for 30 years. Described the physical space of the prison as one that forces close contact. People were standing shoulder to shoulder with each other as they used the phone. Early on, they weren't allowed to cover their faces with anything, not masks, not paper towels, nothing at all. There was no clarity on who's being tested and when they're being tested. People were afraid to go on sick call and ask for help for fear of being retaliated against or for fear of not even getting any treatment or getting the attention they deserve. People talking about their lives in Rikers, living in these dorm type settings that are ripe for infection. People with beds 2 or 3 feet apart from each other, crowded and stacked on top of each other, sleeping head to toe. People afraid to go to the mess hall to eat. Just really awful conditions. And the reality is that these places, whether you're talking about a prison, which is where someone's serving a sentence, or a jail where someone is often being held before their case is resolved, or they're serving a very short sentence of less than a year. These are just awful places that are just designed really to keep people in close quarters and makes it impossible to engage in type of social distancing or other methods to prevent infection and disease.
Right. We learned about 2 gentlemen who were arrested on minor parole violations and died in Rikers as a result of COVID-19, Michael Tyson and Raymond Rivera. Can we just talk about that, how there are still people held incarcerated and they have minor violations at risk of this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, so the reality is that both of their deaths are absolute tragedies, as is any death. Anywhere. And my heart kind of breaks for their families. I think what these terrible circumstances speak to is the absolute urgency of releasing people from these facilities as quickly as possible. But also speaks to kind of the absurdity that we have with respect to our system of never forgiving people, of never, of having these oppressive systems entangled in people's lives long after they paid their debt to society. And the fact that they were there for these minor technical violations, things like failing to report to a parole officer or leaving a drug treatment program, these are not capital offenses. These are not offenses that would require that they be re-imprisoned. They certainly should not have been sentenced they certainly should not have been locked away and facing potential death and illness. And here we see kind of the tragic culmination of all of these terrible ways about going about releasing people. And I know that Mayor de Blasio and others have tried to do their best to try and release people who are dealing with technical violations. And I think some of that work has been useful and it's gotten people out of harm's way. But the reality is that there are far more people still sitting in jails and prisons that we need to try and get out.
On the other hand, Vincent, there's an argument of releasing people accused of convicted of crimes resulting in more crimes. Some people are afraid or worried that if people that are convicted felons are released at this time, then that would lead to more crimes. What is being proposed in regards to freeing that population?
So the reality is that the people who are being released, who have been convicted of any offenses and are being released early, so to speak, often are not able to be released unless they have a stable place to go back to, and they're not being released to shelters and other types of transitory housing. They actually have to have a residence, kind of have all the pieces in place in order to ensure that they're reentering society in at least a safe manner that's going to help them and support them as they're out in the world. A lot of the narrative around people being convicted of crimes, kind of going back and committing more offenses, is really belied by the data. When you think about the vast numbers of people who've been released thus far, and a handful of people have been rearrested, it really speaks to this notion that people are just trying to stoke fear. It's the same type of fear that led us to have these huge jail and prison populations in the first place and drove us down this direction of mass incarceration and mass criminalization, which really has undermined our safety for everyone and health for everyone.
And in regards to race and inequality in the justice system outside of jails, some videos have surfaced of the NYPD arresting people of color for not social distancing. And on the other hand, in Brooklyn, I've seen videos of Hasidic Jews, for instance, blatantly disobeying social distancing by the hundreds. What is your take on this?
So, my view is that it's really unsurprising. Communities of color, especially Black and Latinx communities, have always been over-policed, have always been the subject of heightened police attention. And the disparities that you see in treatment between those communities and communities in Brooklyn that you mentioned are, I think, the same disparities you would see in communities where you see predominantly white neighborhoods across New York City. My sense is, and my view is, that it's often the case that the police are flooding these neighborhoods of people of communities of color, and really engaging in police work in this unfair and disparate way. And I think it's explained largely by our country's kind of history around race and inequality, and this notion that we always associate race with criminality and dangerousness, and therefore think we need to impose this huge police presence on these communities, when the reality is that people are going about their lives and doing the things they need to do in order to survive.
And just to close out, final thoughts, Vincent, on why Governor Cuomo must act now and release more prisoners, and how people can join this cause.
So we're facing an absolute crisis of monumental proportions if we do nothing. I know Governor Cuomo has in recent days said he's willing to release people who are, at least consider people for release, who are 55 and older, who have less than 90 days left on their term of incarceration, and who have been convicted of nonviolent offenses, and who have some health concern that would make them far more likely to suffer death as a result of contracting coronavirus. The reality is, though, that we need to expand the net of people who we're thinking about releasing. Governor Cuomo can safely and should safely release thousands of people from prison. He has executive authority to do so, to commute sentences, to authorize good time credits, to grant medical parole, to grant clemency. We know that if we allow this disease to spread in our prisons and in our jails, it's not only going to cause massive suffering and death to the people who are locked in those facilities, but will also overwhelm the communities that surround those facilities, the hospitals, and other medical treatment facilities that surround those types of facilities. And if we really want to think about our health, the reality is that it's interconnected to all other communities. And so we can't allow a continuing crisis inside prison walls and hope to be safe as a society. In order to get involved, I think, a lot of folks are doing incredible work. Among them is the RAP campaign, the Releasing People in Prison campaign. The organization has been leading this fight, along with a number of other advocates. What I would suggest is going to their website, rapp campaign.com. They're always describing kind of the actions they're taking and the work they're engaging in, and it's work that you can very much get engaged in just from your own home. You should also call the governor, call your representative, ask them to act, demand that they act. This is a crisis, and we need all hands on deck to ensure that we don't allow the spread of this disease to overwhelm all of us and to cause kind of the mass death that we all fear.
Thank you, Vincent, for your time today. Thank you for joining us and giving us this information.
Sure, no problem.
Open BXRx will be right back.
Why should young people care about the spread of coronavirus? Well, we know that people with underlying medical conditions over the age of 60 are at highest risk, but they've got to get it from somebody.
So we're asking everyone to be selfless for others so that we can protect those who are most susceptible.
Not going to bars, not going to restaurants. It all just means physical separation so that you have a space between you and others.
For more information on how you can social distance, please go to coronavirus.gov.
Welcome back to Open BXRx. The MTA continues to operate, transporting essential workers amid ridership and service cuts, and has had over 50 employee deaths as a result of COVID-19. Here to discuss the impact this pandemic has had on MTA is Mario Peloquin, MTA Chief Operating Officer. Thank you for joining us, Mario.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The first thing I wanted to start with was learning about the MTA Essential Service Plan, which was implemented by the MTA in the wake of the pandemic in order to ensure the safety and health of employees and commuters. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we've decided to reduce the service levels as the city got and the region got locked down by the governor by executive order. And the ridership numbers went down significantly, where they are today at about 5 to 10% of the normal ridership that we would see on the transit system. We reduced it to a level that's much higher than what we need to carry the 5 to 10% of the riders. And that's the service reduction that you've heard about, but reducing by 25 to 30% to accommodate 5 to 10% is giving us a lot of room to maintain social distancing.
And about the concerns about subway ridership being mostly homeless and sick, could trains and buses be the hotbed of this spread? And how is the MTA approaching this issue?
First, we don't believe so, because the virus spreads as viruses do, and it's the people that carry the virus, right? Not the trains or the buses. Infection happens where people that are infected get into contact with various items. So that's the first part. The second part is only essential workers have been supposed to travel anywhere in the region and the city for quite a while now. And those people normally know how to they've been educated and they know how to take care of sanitization and spreading germs, microbes, viruses, and so on. And third, there have been a lot of measures put in place by the state, by the city, and by MTA to further help reduce the spread of any viruses. So I think together, all those levels have done everything that they could to prevent the spread of virus. Of course, not everybody listens to the good advice from the health professionals and so on. So there is going to be contact or spread anywhere people go, grocery stores, drugstores, restaurants, and so on. And of course, that includes the transit system. But we don't agree that the transit system or the subway system is the main spread of any virus.
And Mario, as we know, some NYC council members have called for Governor Cuomo to close buses and trains. What is the likelihood of this happening, and is MTA prepared for such a thing to happen?
Well, when you think about it objectively, it would be really irresponsible to shut down a transit system when the main purpose of that system during a pandemic like this is to carry the essential workers that are out there to save lives or help us feed ourselves, or prevent fires, police the city, and so on. If we stop those essential services, all of a sudden, all those tens of thousands of people would not have a mean to get to their work, to do that critical work at this stage. So thinking rationally about this, the negative effects of shutting down the system would be a lot worse for the society than maintaining the system in a responsible manner like we've done.
And now on the deaths of transit employees, MTA Chief Pat Foy, who tested positive for COVID himself, blamed the CDC for the deaths of MTA employees. Can you just comment on that?
Yes, it's a real tragedy that we've lost employees at the MTA and several employees in all the trades and all the agencies that we have, the transit agencies that we have. So it is a real tragedy. It's difficult for the MTA executives and management, because our job is to maintain health and safety for our employees, of course, in providing the essential service that we have to provide. But I would say it's difficult for the colleagues of those employees that have passed, because of course they're close to them, and it's really concerning when you see a colleague that passes because of a pandemic like this. But I would say it's a lot more tragic and more difficult for the families. And that is something that really affects all of us at the MTA, because we feel for those family members that they did nothing wrong except go to work, carry the essential workers around, contracted the disease somewhere, and then passed.
And about the families, the MTA has established a COVID-19 benefit. Can we just learn about that?
Yeah, we've decided there are no rules or regulations for this, and we've decided that to support those families that are there and are now grieving and so on. Money doesn't solve the issue, but contributing to their future with a $500,000 donation to the family, benefit to the family, is going to help with the hardship that they're living through right now and the immediate costs that they have to incur. So it's a significant amount of money, but it's a small gesture in the grand scheme of things to at least help with one portion of the hardship that they're going to go through.
Right. And Mario, from my understanding, you're in a center monitoring the pandemic now. Can you just tell us about what's going on behind you?
The situation room behind us was activated very early on as the pandemic arrived here in New York, and it's monitored 24 hours a day. And the people that are staffing that room are basically monitoring progress of the pandemic in the city, in the state, and in the whole country, and keeping an eye on what's happening around the world, so that we can prepare every day, several calls every day, several reports are prepared every day, just so that we can adjust and be always prepared for what we see coming from a few days ahead in other countries in Europe or outside of the continent, to any trends that we can detect here in the continent and the United States.
Thank you. And before we go, Mario, just some final thoughts on what's next for the MTA during this pandemic and a message for commuters and transit workers alike.
Okay, well, we've put in place very aggressive measures to help the safety and the health of our employees and the passengers, the customers for the MTA, from aggressive sanitizing to reinforcing state directives and healthcare professional directives, to the point where now everybody has to wear face masks and so on. We've helped also with educating people about social distancing, and the NYPD helps us with that. You may have seen them on platforms with megaphones reinforcing the messaging. It's only to help people follow those guidelines that make a lot of sense. Going forward, we're monitoring now, in close coordination with the governor, the city, and so on, the eventual restart of the economy in New York and the region, and all working together, as the governor says, like cogs in a wheel, so that we can provide the service level that's needed for whatever level of restart we do at the same pace. So we're very busy activating plans and looking at our plans to make sure they're perfect all the time, so we can react quickly to any progress or regress that happens over the next weeks and months.
Thank you, Mario Peloquin, MTA Chief Operating Officer, for your time today.
My pleasure.
Open BXRx, we'll be right back.
For many New York City teens and young adults, summer is a season for career exploration and job opportunities, as New York City launches the annual Summer Youth Employment Program. But as uncertainties of the coronavirus pandemic continue to grow, Mayor de Blasio announced the program has been suspended for summer 2020.
But we're not confident about June. We're not confident about July. We're not confident about August, that we could have people gathering together again in large numbers. And that's what Summer Youth is and all these other youth programs.
Disappointed by the announcement, many youth-based organizations are speaking out. Organizations like Teens Take Charge, a nonprofit devoted to amplifying young voices. Alumni and leader for the organization, Jorge Morales, explains the passion behind their mission to save SYEP.
I mean, once we see something that's happening within the community that is directly affecting, again, minority students, it's something that we had to stand up for.
The Summer Youth Employment Program provides work experience and supplemental income for over 70,000 New York City youth, an opportunity no longer available to New York City's most vulnerable communities.
Majority of the program serves low socioeconomic background students, and majority of them are Latin and Black students. So this hurts them tremendously in multiple ways. We can already see the disparities within the way that this virus has been affecting our communities, as we're the most affected by by this virus. Now we're the most affected by cuts.
Hoping to make a change, Teens Take Charge started a petition that has now reached over 25,000 signatures, asking Mayor de Blasio to expand and save the Summer Youth Employment Program.
A lot of the individuals that have reached out and that have basically stated in the support of Save SYEP either have fought for it in the past and know how much this means, not just for them, but for the youth.
To learn more about Teens Take Charge and their mission to save SYEP, visit their website, teenstakecharge.com. Reporting for BronxNet, Kevin Aline.
Welcome back to Open BXRx. COVID-19 has affected underserved communities in various socio-economical ways. Students and parents, for instance, have been feeling the educational impact. How has COVID-19 heightened the lack of equity in education? Joining us now to discuss is Francisco Araiza of Education Trust NY. Thank you for joining us, Francisco.
Thank you for having me.
One of the first things I want to start with is, of course, learning about the Education Trust NY and what the organization does.
Sure thing. So again, my name is Francisco Araiza, and I am the Associate Director of Policy and Research at the Education Trust. We are a data-driven advocacy and research organization focused on educational equity for all students, particularly students who are low income and students of color. So we focus on closing the gaps in equity, achievement, and opportunity from early childhood through college completion.
Can we talk about the lack of education justice prior to this pandemic, prior to COVID-19, before we discuss what's going on right now?
Of course. So I think it's important to just keep in mind the critical role schools play in the lives of all children and young adults. So they are a source of structure and stability, a place of learning and social emotional development, where meaningful relationships are built and nurtured. But we also know that students who are low income, students of color, English learners, and students with disabilities have less access to the high quality educational experiences that should be the norm for all students. So what we mean by that is that New York's most vulnerable students often lack access to strong, well-prepared and supported educators, gatekeeper courses that will prepare them for college careers and active civic life, and the type of funding that allows schools to invest in adequate supports and wraparound services.
And now, how has COVID-19 heightened these injustices and impacted underserved students?
Yeah, first, I think it's important to acknowledge that state and district leaders, teachers, and all school staff are really trying to work tirelessly to make the needs of students in a very unpredictable and fluid situation. But I think you're right that we must highlight how the crisis will impact the most vulnerable students and their families, since they will be impacted the hardest. The students who were underserved by our education system during normal times are also the most likely to be underserved by our educational system during this crisis. Again, schools play a critical role in most students' lives. For our most vulnerable students, that starts with something as fundamental as providing daily meals, which school closures have disrupted. But we also need to think about the way instruction will continue throughout the period of school closures. For example, do students have access to learning materials and technology and the resources that are needed for meaningful remote learning experiences?
And now Education Trust NY has conducted these recent polls regarding access to tech for remote learning. Can we learn about some of those findings?
So sure. Before we talk about the resources and barriers around technology, I think some of the other interesting things that we found in the poll are that nearly 90% of New York State's public school parents indicated that they're concerned that their child will fall behind academically as a result of school closures. So this is ranking higher than a lot of other or any other financial or social emotional concern for parents right now. Parents also said that regular access to their child's teacher would be the most helpful, even ahead of technology resources. So 95% of parents reported that it would be helpful to have access to their child's teacher, but only half of parents say their schools have made that available. So we definitely think there's an opportunity there for more concerted efforts to make direct contact with students and their families. As far as the technology issues are concerned, there's really three main things. First, there are not enough devices in the home. So approximately 64% of parents statewide say that schools lending mobile technology devices would be helpful. When you take a closer look at parents that have an income of less than $50,000 a year, that percentage increases to 72%. And there's also a lack of reliable high-speed internet for many families. So this is an issue we saw for a majority of New York City residents that feel less than confident that they will be able to participate in distance learning. And finally, there's nearly 1/3 of parents in New York City that report not knowing how to use the remote learning software and that has been provided. So there's definitely a digital literacy, that's happening there.
Right. And I've also heard about, students and parents who live in shelters who don't have access to this internet as well, or are, they're the last ones to receive these devices.
Yeah, so I think there's added issues for students in temporary housing when they're in shelters. A lot of the shelters have rules in place that don't allow them to take the devices into that space. And then in addition to that, the high-speed internet can be a huge issue.
Right. Among these findings, Francisco, what are low-income parents' biggest concerns when it comes to their child not being in school during this time?
Yeah, so I think all parents right now are under a tremendous amount of stress. So approximately 80% of the parents that we spoke to are reporting higher levels of stress than usual. For a majority of families in New York City, they're reporting that they're concerned around their child feeling safe and emotionally at ease. So those are really big concerns. For low-income parents in particular, though, their biggest concerns are around having their child fall behind academically, which we've already talked about a little bit, but also lacking opportunities to socialize and to sort of be around their friends and teachers, and whether or not they can provide a safe home environment for their child.
Right. Now that we discussed all of these issues and how the education system and parents and students have been impacted by COVID, can you tell us about the Education Trust's 6 steps that schools can take to address educational equity right now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we've really urged school districts to take the 6 steps to address educational equity. The first step is ensuring equitable access to learning materials. This would include the issues we've already addressed around technology, such as access to devices, high-speed internet, and support in navigating learning software. But really, it extends beyond that. It also means access to paper packets of materials and grade-appropriate text to keep students engaged in learning. Secondly, we think that schools need to work closely with teachers and counselors to provide an appropriate amount of support. So schools should engage with teachers in preparing instructional materials to continue students' learning. We know that students right now are in a very unfamiliar territory, but that applies to teachers as well. And so we believe that there needs to be an added support to make sure teachers are delivering the best learning experience for students remotely. In addition to that, schools should also work with school counselors to meet the needs of students who rely on school counselors and psychologists for social emotional support, post-secondary planning, and just to deal with the added stress of the pandemic. And third of all, we think that the schools should really be addressing the specific learning needs of students with disabilities, English language learners, and students in temporary housing. So we've already covered some of those, but really, broadly speaking, school districts should ensure that the learning materials are made available to meet the specific needs of these learners, and that outreach is conducted to these particular students and families about the resources that are available. There's also a need to make sure that all information and documents are available in families' home languages so that they're reaching English language learners. Next, we think that there needs to be a focus on providing breakfast and lunch to students who rely on school meals. Now, we know the city's already doing that, but when we think about our poll, we found that nearly 1/3 of parents either do not have access to free meals or don't even know that the resource exists. So we definitely feel like there's some room for improvement there. Many schools are already offering grab-and-go meals at school sites, but where possible, there should be access to these in the different levels in the community, whether that be food banks or other food pantries in other areas. We believe schools should be coordinating with trusted community partners. So schools should work with community-based organizations, faith communities, after-school partners, and other trusted partners to ensure clear and consistent communication for students and families around coronavirus and also school closures. We believe that schools should also connect with local organizations that maybe offer programming for other services for students when schools are closed. And this should all be consistent with the guidance that we're getting from health officials and other state officials. And finally, we think that it's really important for schools to be actively working on connecting families to other services they may need. Now, while schools cannot be expected to do everything, we know that they are a vital and trusted hub for students and their families in a time of uncertainty. Schools should work with their local governments so that they are able to point families to health, housing, legal, and other resources recognizing that this is a period of economic hardship for a lot of families.
These all sound like pertinent solutions that will absolutely help a lot of parents and students that are uncertain during this time. Thank you for sharing, Francisco.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on behalf of the Education Trust NY. Folks, to see studies on education justice and find more information, you can visit newyork.edtrust.org. Open BXRx. We'll be right back.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people. Avoid crowds. Stay home if you can. Wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
Al tomar transporte público, no toques su teléfono. Lleve desinfectante para sus manos y úselo inmediatamente al salir del autobús o tren. No te toques la cara. Si alguien tose o estornuda, aléjase. Lávese las manos con agua y jabón lo antes posible. Limite el contacto con los postes. Si es posible, evite las horas pico. No comas ni bebas en transporte público. Mantenga su bolsa del piso o otras superficies. Evite tocar directamente los torniquetes. Manténgase al día con lo último de su departamento de salud local y el CDC.
Welcome back to Open BXRx. Now more than ever through this pandemic, it is vital to protect our immune systems. How can we do this through what we eat and drink? Comelonas is a woman of color Bronx-based foodie duo sharing recipes and holistic facts and tips. Joining us now to discuss some ingredients you should have at home right now and more are Stephanie Rodriguez and Quenia Alvarez of Comelonas. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, ladies. So the first thing I wanted to get into right off the jump was using food for holistic healing. For anyone who doesn't know, what is holistic healing?
So holistic healing for us is, you could break it down and look at the word on its own. So holistic, whole, untouched, natural, coming from the earth, whether it's acupuncture, whether it's herbal remedies like roots, fruits, veggies, anything that comes from the earth, anything that is pure, unfiltered, unprocessed is holistic. And it's not only with what you eat, it's also your mental, your spiritual, just your whole as a body, like as a person. So healing through that, through natural remedies from the earth. So that's what we believe holistic is. Anything that's pretty much found outside the pharmaceutical realm, right? Where it kind of like just helps certain side effects, but then it might come back instead of going to the root problem. So when you talk about holistic medicine, it's a type of healing that tends to go to the root of the problem.
And just to also say, like, before, holistic healing also comes from our ancestors. Before we were doctors and nurses and scientific, we were healers. Our ancestors were healers. So that also has to do with holistic healing, the most organic way of consuming chemicals are pretty much our plants, pretty much what the earth provides for us,
Let's talk about the food aspect of healing and taking care of yourself. I know that you both curated a list of ingredients to stock up for during quarantine and a breakdown of their holistic properties. Can we just talk about that list and why it's important to have those items in stock right now?
Yeah, so some of the items that we have in our households, obviously water is very important. We do need to keep our bodies hydrated. Lime, lemons, garlic, apple cider vinegar. You can dilute it with a little bit of water. It's great for building the immune system, fighting bacteria. Oranges, turmeric, moringa powder, nuts, berries, avocado, dandelions, ginger, and things of that nature.
Yep. So pretty much these are things you could find at your local supermarket or bodega. Just, she said water. That was the first one. Water is so important, and I feel like that's something else that we're like really not as educated about. We think of water, okay, like, yeah, but it's so important. It lubricates our muscles. It sends, and it could even affect how depressed we can feel. You know, if we're not drinking enough water, it can clog up, you know, our minds. And water actually opens up a portal for oxygen in your brain. If you're not drinking water, you're not going to be doing good mentally. You're going to be very cloudy in your mind. We spoke about lemons.
Often we forget to, you know, grab a glass of water, or drink water, because we're so like consumed with everything that's going on. So I think that was very important to bring up top for sure.
For sure. You could think of yourself as like a plant with like complex emotions. You know, if you take a plant and you look at the soil and it's super dry, the plant is going to dry up and it's not going to function the way it's supposed to. Now, if you water that plant, you're going to see it soaking and it's going to become greener. It's going to become beautiful. It's going to grow the way it's supposed to grow. So in that same way, stay hydrated, you know, and just drink your water as many times a day. We're actually supposed to drink a gallon of water a day. If we're able to get some filters, reduce the waste of plastic, you know. Limes and lemons, that's citrus, so it has like vitamin C. If you guys can afford vitamin C supplements, because supplements can be very expensive, stock up on oranges, stock up on you know, lemons, limes, grapefruits, things like that have citrus. It's really good to fight coughs, viruses. Garlic is your bestie. We noticed, we went to a supermarket recently, and there wasn't that much garlic left. So whenever they stock up, you know, make sure you take your garlic. Apple cider vinegar, if you feel like you've been consuming a lot of sugars, just take some in the morning and in the night, and it resets your body. Try to stay away from sugar. It's a no, because sugar, what it does is that it attacks your cells. So instead of those cells being used to protect you, they're actually being killed. And so let's say you're eating a cake, right? Within 30 minutes, that cake will take effect, like that sugar, and it'll stay in your body within 5 hours. So 5 hours, you could be like, just your cells can be diminishing and you're not even aware of it. So that's one thing.
A lot of these fruits and these that we've mentioned are alkaline foods. These are alkaline foods. It has a lot of the alkaline foods have pH, pretty much.
It balances your body. So there's a level of acidity that we should not cross. So acidic foods are like, think of fried foods, you know, processed foods, things that, you know, are like little wrappers that have like a whole bunch of sugar, high carbs. Whereas alkaline, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Sebi, but he talks a lot about that. You know, alkaline foods is like things that we have in our homes, you know, that our mamas, our grandmas be buying. Lemons, limes, avocado, turmeric, onions, garlic, ginger.
Ginger has been like a hot selling item also in the supermarkets. I know.
For sure. So ginger, like people know it for like nausea. If you're nauseous, you put a little piece of ginger under your tongue and it goes away. But it's also an anti-inflammatory. Now, a lot of the things that we put on the list, almost every single thing we put on the list is anti-inflammatory. So that's because when you have foods that cause inflammation, that's literally an open portal for you to get sick with any type of disease. So when you have anti-inflammatory, it closes that gap and you're less susceptible to get sick.
That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, for sure. Moringa powder, Amazon. You guys can Amazon moringa powder. Super cheap. It's really great for you.
And can we just get into your IG post on take care of your body? That's like the title on it, and some tips that you have in regards to that.
For sure. So yeah, we decided to come up with this post because, you know, the world is going through chaos right now. There's a huge pandemic going on. A lot of people are being affected. So we just took these, you know, put a small grain of sand there and decided to create a post just talking about different tips, like wearing your mask, the importance of that, the importance of meditation, because with so much happening, it's so easy to be consumed by the media. It's so easy to be consumed by fear. It's easy to be consumed by anxiety, all of that, you name it. So just to tune into yourself, check in with yourself. Sometimes we check in with each other, which is essential as well, right? To talk to our loved ones on a daily basis, but also to check in on yourself. How are you feeling? You know, are you doing something maybe like, I don't know, like with me, I noticed that I disassociate sometimes. So I'm like, let me check in with myself. Let me read a book. Let me watch a funny movie. So I put, on meditation. Quenia had told me about taking deep breaths, right? Like sometimes, when you're anxious and you just hold in your breath and you don't notice, and you're like, like, let me take in that deep breath of air, because I was just clenching it. And also just like leisure activities, things that bring you back to your safety zone, to grounding, whether that's drawing, calling a friend, painting, making a recipe, anything that makes you feel good, that brings you back to yourself. We also spoke about like connecting with others, like the importance of connecting with the family members.
Sometimes my mind can be scattered in different ways. Again, going back to just doing the things that you like, meditation, at least for me, grounding and breathing exercises really helps me to calm down and take a step back, and do things one day at a time.
And we've been talking about, like the importance of mental health, because it's not really spoken about, especially like in our hoods in the Bronx. And, sometimes you just don't have access to that, whether that be because of like financially, it's just not accessible. So one thing that works for me, because financially is a struggle for me to get professional therapy, is Headspace, which is an app. You guys can download it, tune into that. Tell your family, no me molesten, like don't bother me. Let me just, get some time for myself, some peace and quiet. And that's a free resource that really, honestly, it really helps. And it's free, So, things like that, writing it out, talking to a friend, not keeping things bottled in. Crying is okay. Crying is okay. It's real. We're going through it. Taking breaks from the news is so imperative too, because first of all, a lot of it is like fear tactics. I would say, it's a lot of things that are happening, but are not really like, some things are not confirmed, so a lot of information is just overloading. So it becomes oversaturated, even if it's subconsciously, and we might overeat because we're anxious. We need to like feel good, or we might, do something that is not really good for us, whatever that may be, that vice, and it's just to call ourselves out and be like, remind ourselves that we're going to be okay. We have people that care about us. I care about me. I'm going to take this pause and I'm going to reground myself. So we just wanted to do that.
Got you. Can we just talk about real quick the importance of food education in the Bronx? So like during this time, we all have to know about what we're putting into our bodies. And every time we go outside, we see like the chicken spot is open, and things that supply fried foods, like you said, that are not good for your body are still open. But we have the power in our hands to kind of provide that nutrition for ourselves.
Even before this pandemic, I do want to say that a lot of these issues have been going on for a very long time, especially in our communities. I mean, even in my community, me growing up in Florida, we were growing up with, especially we weren't able to afford certain things. Things weren't accessible to us. And if they were, like a lot of like the fruits and vegetables, they're very pricey, especially organic foods, they're very pricey. So it's very important. A lot of things that we're doing also in Comelonas, we're going to list up a few recipes that are easy,
stay tuned,
and economical, again, for our communities. As a lot of you may know, New York, especially in the Bronx, we have the highest asthma rates in the country. That says a lot to me. It just looks at like, how this system or how the hospitals are just putting like a bandage over that and not looking at the problem, not getting to the root of the problem, as far as like where we're at, like in an environment of like an environmental inequality.
Yeah. And you actually made me think about, I was reading this article recently about how 4 major highways, like they're connected to the Bronx, and that's where there's the most pollution. It's actually called Asthma Alley, like Mott Haven. It's called Asthma Alley. And
Mott Haven.
Yeah, Mott Haven. I thought of you too. And it's just the fact that we're victims of this, we're victims of goods that we do not even consume that produce this type of pollution. Like for example, Fresh Direct, that's where the headquarters is in Mott Haven, so there's 1,000 trucks or more a day that pass through that region of the Bronx. What's that causing? That's causing hella toxic emissions. That's causing hella asthma rates to skyrocket even more than it has been. That's causing depression. That's causing just really, really bad quality of life. Just really concerning quality of life that's affecting our children, that's affecting, women who are pregnant, and these kids have asthma from birth. And it's like, we ask ourselves why, and like us, our grandparents, the elderly that are being kind of forgotten, people in NYCHA who are already going through so much. So these are things that it's just like, it really is heart-wrenching to me. Like, I've cried about it, if I'm being honest. And it's just, we just need to talk about it more, and just, get whoever we need to get uncomfortable. But this is the truth. This is a matter of the fact. And just like holding accountable these companies that are causing so much pollution and so much like hurt in our communities, so much damage.
I wish we had more time to delve into this, but we gotta cut it short. But thank you both for your time and for providing this holistic healing and this knowledge for us today.
No, thank you for having us. Thank you.
For food tips and holistic facts, you can follow Comelonas on Instagram to stay in touch with Stephanie and Quenia. That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in to BXRx. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and your family safety and wellness now and always. Until next time.